Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Educate to Self-Regulate. Now this episode is quite an exciting episode for me. It has been an intention of mine for this year to record some solo episodes for you, sharing some learning around self-regulated learning and some of my thinking in this field. It's quite funny that it's now late December and the term for here in Australia at least is starting to wrap up. And it's the first time that I've actually been able to find the time to do this for you. Anyhow, that does not make it any less important. And so here I am, nevertheless. I wanted to actually, for this episode, given it is not only my first solo episode, but it's also the last episode that I'm recording for 2025. And it just, at this time of the year, it seems pertinent to talk about metacognition and particularly a phase of metacognition known as self-reflection. So if you're not familiar with the three phases of self-regulated learning, and it depends on the model that you look at, there are a number of models that advocate for three phases of self-regulated learning. And so one concept is that the phases of self-regulated learning are planning, monitoring, and evaluating. I find that language really accessible. Planning, monitoring, and evaluating our learning rolls off the tongue. It's very easy to remember. And I think that for me, if we're thinking about language that our young people can grab hold of and use, I think planning, monitoring, and evaluating is nice language. At the same time, if you're familiar with the late Barry Zimmerman's the triad model of self-regulated learning, he has slightly different terms. So planning, he calls forethought. Again, I like that term forethought, and I found myself using that often in conversations with colleagues or friends where I say, oh, it's fascinating seeing your level of forethought here in terms of your planning for the future or planning for a session or planning for that conversation. So forethought being important. The second phase, so what I originally termed monitoring, Barry Zimmerman had termed performance. And so this is where there's a direct action, so you're completing or doing the learning activity, and then the final phase being self-reflection or evaluating, as I had termed it before. And given we're in term 4, it's the end of 2025, and for those of you in Australia, this is the end of our school year. It just seems so timely for us to tap into that third phase, self-reflection or evaluating, and to think about what that means not only for our students but also for us as adult learners, and how we might go about self-reflecting and self-evaluating our learning. So one thing that I'm finding myself doing a lot of right now is reflecting on 2025, and I'll either ask myself a series of questions like, what have been some of my proudest moments? What have been some of my failures? What have been some of the small wins? What are some of my key takeaways? Have I been successful? What would I change moving forward? So on and so forth, like all these prompts. And if you have a copy of Educate to Self-Regulate, then it is page 100 where I've got a table of metacognitive prompts for learning. And there's a whole column there with evaluating or self-reflection questions. So there's a series of questions that we can ask ourselves, and that's nice. That's great. We can reflect on those in a really meaningful way. The other thing, if you are inclined for some level of journaling, I think taking the time to record those reflections, to note down some of your own evaluations, I think that's really important. And the reason I say that is because when we write something down, we actually reduce the cognitive load in our working memory because we no longer have to hold that information in there. We can let it go or write it down. And so we can actually achieve slightly deeper levels of reflection as a result of writing it down, okay? And so I would encourage you, if you choose a series of questions, any questions are going to be useful, but there's multiple kind of reflective tools that you could use. You could use like a PMI, like a plus minus interesting. What was the positives? Where are the opportunities for growth? And what was interesting that happened this year? You could do a SWOT analysis. What were the strengths of this year? What were the weaknesses? What are the opportunities moving forwards? And what are some of the threats? You could use like a start, stop, continue. So what are you going to start doing next year? What are you going to stop doing now that's not working for you? What are you going to continue doing from this year moving into next year? So there's a range of prompts, protocols here that you can use to guide a deeper level of reflection. And I think they're going to be really important as you reflect. So I took some of this thinking and have been reflecting on the key takeaways, particularly in relation to the podcast, given this is a podcast episode. And I wanted to highlight some of the small wins that I think the podcast has had this year. Obviously, previous co-host and good friend Rory at the start of this year shared with me that he would be stepping back from the podcast to focus on his other work. And so it's the first year that I have navigated this terrain on my own, and it has been a learning curve. And so I set out engaging with the community to get a sense for what you were after in terms of a podcast episode. So I brought in more guests, particularly educators that are dabbling in the space of self-regulated learning. Some of my favorite episodes in this space were chatting with Amelia King. That was episode 34, around the use of AI as a metacognitive talk partner.
So we've got AI rappers, and there's all sorts of commonly known ones out there. And a lot of them give you the ability to prompt them and to say, I want you to act as a metacognitive partner for my students, ask them questions about what they're doing, give them feedback, use strategies from the Harvard Project Zero toolbox to support them in their metacognitive journey.
Episode 32 and 33 with Rebecca Birch around the Queenwood Smart Study approach was super interesting, and you can read that report online, but also, Queenwood are very generous with sharing a lot of their kind of resources online as well.
So part of the program was actually sharing with students the cognitive science behind why the strategies work. So we know that students rely on strategies that are not effective. We know they rely on things like highlighting and rereading. So for students to even see, so using something like a Menti to survey them, and they can see that they use all these ineffective strategies that feel very productive. If you end up with a page of highlighting or you've done an hour of reading, you feel like you've achieved something, you're nailing it, when in fact those strategies don't actually work well. They lead to a really superficial and almost an illusion of knowing rather than really knowing that content.
Having Talisha Bray from Benithan Primary School come on and share what they have been doing in a primary school setting around a range of approaches that actually tap into the different knowledge categories of self-regulated learning.
So we really unpacked like the 5 SRL categories, I guess we call them, in our classroom. So the metacognition, the motivation, cognition, the resource management and emotion strategies. We shared what strategies we currently had and brought as learners to our classroom. And we've worked on building those over time, but then also adding new strategies in each week. And part of our team planning has very much been setting strategies that we would like to teach the students. And we commit to teaching the strategy or several strategies each week, and we're slowly building our repertoire.
And then most recently, Nadine Dixon, not only in episode 36, coming in and sharing some thinking around learning journals, but Nadine coming back as a bit of my resident kind of co-host, coming back into episode 40 and unpacking some research around process coaches and how process coaches can support self-regulated learning implementation in schools. So that was exciting, bringing in some of those guests. And then towards the end of this year, I became convinced that actually a longer form podcast episode with researchers and educational leaders would be really powerful. And so, of course, episode 41 with the lovely Kath Murdoch is an absolute highlight for me. And I appreciate Kath contributing to the conversation around self-regulated learning here on the podcast. And so those are all really exciting things that have happened. There's so much knowledge and learning being generated, co-constructed in this podcast. And that's only going to evolve even further in 2026. So one thing I can tell you is that in 2026, there'll be more long-form episodes with researchers and thought leaders in the space of self-regulated learning. I think that's going to be really important for us, bringing together research with practice. Absolutely want to keep having other practitioners in the sort of short form 20-minute episodes, sharing their practice, connecting that to the research, and even dissecting research from a practitioner lens. And of course, hopefully being able to bring you some more solo episodes in 2026. I would like to unpack and share some of my own thinking around the research, what I think it means for practitioners and how I might translate it into classrooms, keeping in mind that these are just these are my thoughts, these are my perceptions. And so I hold my own ideas lightly. You should hold my ideas lightly too, I think. And so noting that these are snapshots into my thinking at any one point in time, and that thinking may well change and evolve as it does as I read and learn more. As per any episode, I thought I would include an on the reg segment here. And I thought I would share with you 2 strategies that I'm applying as I enter into the last legs of 2025, recognizing that the holiday break is only just around the corner. And also recognizing that 2025 has been a huge year. For me personally, since the book came out in 2024, the interest in self-regulated learning and my work particularly has really grown, and it's been really exciting. It's been a little bit overwhelming, but all in all, I think it's a great problem to have. We're all grappling with important workloads, and I say important rather than large or busy workloads, etc. I think the work we do is critical. It's absolutely essential, and from a self-regulated learning perspective, we have so much control, professional autonomy to make decisions about how we navigate that. And so whenever I'm feeling like I'm teetering on the edges of burnout or feeling a sense of overwhelm, I'm reflecting on what is within my circle of control, and therefore what can I do to alter that situation. That stops me from edging into exhaustion or burnout, so keeping me just on the right side of it. And as we near the holidays, I think it's really important to think about how we're going to show up to rest and rejuvenation over that break to make sure that 2026 can be a fantastic year. So 2 strategies that I want to share with you. One is, it's a self-talk statement, and full credit to my health coach, my personal trainer, Anthony. He is amazing at just helping me keep my physical health optimal. He made a comment to me in one of our calls maybe a couple of months ago. I kept saying to him that I'm showing up as best as I can every single day. And he said to me, he said, the trick is to show up to rest in the same way that you show up to training. And I thought that was a really powerful statement. Show up to rest in the same way that you show up to training. And I hadn't thought about that. You know, when I go to the gym, I go, right, I'm going to lock down for an hour. I'm going to be focused. I'm going to be fully present in this gym experience, and I'm going to try and lift more weights or get better technique and so on and so forth. All fundamentally so that I can operate as best as I can in my service to education and my family. But his comment, show up to rest in the same way that you show up to training, got me to think about the quality in which I was showing up to rest. And so I'm urging you to reflect on that prompt and think about how will you show up to rest as you enter into the school break, so that you can make sure that not only do you rest and rejuvenate, but you can make sure that you're set up really well for 2026. The other strategy I'm going to share with you, which has been a shift for me, for a number of years I have meditated first thing in the morning, but this year I made a shift because I started training, so lifting weights a few days a week first thing in the morning. And so my meditation practice fell by the wayside, and I've recognized that is still an essential practice for me. And if it's not going to happen in the morning, it has to happen elsewhere. So I'm currently recalibrating my meditation practice. It'll either go back into the morning routine. Otherwise, I'm also playing with the idea of how I can bring that into my evening routine. Yeah, ideally, I'd have a morning and an evening routine, but there's a range of reasons why that won't always happen. It's just a strategic planning exercise. Where can it fit? And therefore, how will I engage and show up to that practice on a regular basis, consistently and in a high quality way? Okay, I'm going to leave you with that. There's a lot in there. Hopefully some deep value for you as you reflect on 2025, but also edge into the break moving forward in preparation for 2026. If you're in Australia, I'm wishing you a lovely break, no doubt well deserved. If you're elsewhere, you get a shorter break, still wishing you a lovely break. If you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas, and of course, Happy New Year. I can't wait to record more podcasts in 2026, and not only to evolve my own learning, but to co-construct our knowledge about self-regulated learning together so that we can progress this mission and move the needle forward with helping our young people become better self-regulated learners.